The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on earth nations will be in dismay, perplexed by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will die of fright in anticipation of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these signs begin to happen, stand erect and raise your heads, because your redemption is at hand. Beware that your hearts do not become drowsy with carousing and drunkenness and the anxieties of daily life, and that day catch you by surprise like a trap. For that day will assault everyone who lives on the face of the earth. Be vigilant at all times and pray that you have the strength to escape the tribulations that are imminent and to stand before the Son of Man." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
A couple years ago, just to answer the question, wonder what it would be like, I decided to keep track for a month how many questions I'd get asked before this Mass, the 11:15 Mass, by the time I leave the front door of the rectory to come to church and actually start the Mass. And I came up with an average of 16 questions before I start Mass. Now that might surprise you. You may say, well, what's that have to do with anything? I can tell you right now, on mornings like today, I am proof that God's grace is real and powerful, because otherwise this pea brain of mine could not deal with all that we have to deal with this morning. The RCIA, the children's worship service, and so on. So many questions, so many comments, but the one that got my attention this morning came from our reader over there, David Walsh. David writes for the Huntington newspaper, as most of you know, the sports section. And he said to me, and it was such an incredible insight, I just had to share it with you. He said, today, he said, I want to issue a challenge, Father Jim. He said, today being the first Sunday of Advent, we begin our new missalettes. And we do, you'll notice, brand new missalettes in the pews. He said, here's what I want you to ask the people. You're here as we begin reading from the front of the missalette, but will you be around here by the time we read from the end of the missalette? A little Catholic guilt there, okay? You didn't think I heard, I would remember, did you? Okay, I can't remember a thing else that I was going to say to you, but anyway, no. Someone did say to me yesterday after the 5:30 Mass, they said, Father, that reading you read, didn't you just read that a couple of weeks ago? And I said, which reading? And he said, well, about the end of time and the stars falling out of the sky and all that kind of stuff. And I said, yes and no. Once again, a good Catholic answer. Yes, in the sense that it was one of those accounts of the end of time. We find them in Mark 13, Luke 21, which was today's gospel, and Matthew 24. And interesting enough, John knows nothing about the Son of Man coming at the end of time. And that's because of a little technique that he uses. But, whereas 2 weeks ago I read from Mark chapter 13, today we listen to Luke's account, and there's one huge difference between the two. In Mark chapter 13, he makes it very clear that the temple of Jerusalem is about to come tumbling down thanks to the Roman Empire. But in Mark's thinking, when the temple came down, that would be the end of time. Then the Lord would come back in glory to take us to be with him. But you know what? It didn't happen that way. Luke, on the other hand, writes some 10 to 15 years after Mark's gospel is done. He's already aware of the fact that the temple came tumbling down, but he's also aware of the fact that the Lord did not come at that time. And so he will go so far as to actually focus on life going on by writing a second volume called the Acts of the Apostles. But today we have his talk, his description of the end of time. And it certainly is frightening language. We call it apocalyptic because that word apocalypsis comes from a Greek word which means special revelation. But we hear about all sorts of astrological signs, climatological things that happen on the planet, all sorts of things happening that frighten people to death. Now, what's interesting is the Catholic Church teaches, as I've shared with you, that the end of time is going to come, but when, we do not know. Now, what do people in our country think about the end of time? There's a minority that are very upset and even agitated about it, but the majority of people, and unfortunately many of them in the Catholic community, are either clueless or could care less. Why? Well, first of all, those who are so anxious. December the 21st is a pulsating date for a lot of people in their minds. The Mayan calendar, the Mayan calendar, the Mayan calendar, they're thinking, is that going to be it? Is that going to be the end of the picture? Is it all done at that time? NASA received so many correspondences that they decided to actually put up a website to deal with it, and also they sent out a group of experts to lecture on it. In fact, on November 28th, this past Wednesday, to soothe the 2012 doomsday fears, they began talking about the truth of these Mayan calendar predictions. These fears, says NASA, are based on misinterpretations of the Mayan calendar. On the 21st, the date of the winter solstice, a calendar cycle called the 13th Bactan comes to an end. Although Mayan scholars agree that the ancient Maya would not have seen this day as an apocalyptic event, rumors have spread with a cosmic event that may end the life on our lives on planet Earth. Some are even saying that a planet's going to appear out of nowhere and come and crash into planet Earth and destroy us all. The problem is this. While it is a joke to some people, says David Morrison, an astrobiologist at NASA Ames Research Center, it's a mystery to some. There's a core of people, he says, who are truly concerned. Unfortunately, Morris says, the fantasy has real-life consequences. As one of NASA's prominent speakers on 2012 Doomsday Mist, David Morrison said he receives many emails and letters from worried citizens, particularly young people. Some say they can't eat, some say they can't sleep, others say that they are suicidal. He says, while it is a joke to some people and a mystery to others, the core of the people are truly concerned. And his closing comment in his interview was, I think it's evil for people to propagate rumors on the internet that frighten other people about something that just is not true, especially little children. So, for those who are anxious about December 21st, NASA says forget about it. And they offer all kinds of evidence to indicate that their position is valid. But what about the majority of people, especially Catholics, who have no clue with regard to the end of time and really could care less? What's the problem? What's the problem with the fact that it's one of the basic teachings of the Catholic Church and has been for 2012 years? How come we've lost sight of this important dogma? Well, one of my favorite church teachers, Archbishop Chaput, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, wrote an article, and here's what he had to say. The real religion of vast numbers of American young people is a kind of fuzzy moral niceness with a generic, under-demanding God on duty to make us happy whenever we need him. This is the legacy, not only part of it, but the saddest part of it, that my generation, the boomer generation, has left to the church in the United States. He goes on to say, if young people are morally and religiously ignorant by the millions, they didn't get that way on their own. We taught them. And by we, he means bishops, priests, sisters, deacons, and lay people that we hired to teach religion. They learn from our indifference, our complacency, our moral compromises, our self-absorption, our eagerness to succeed, our vanity, our greed, our lack of Catholic conviction and zeal. We need to impress on their hearts that salvation is not just a pious fiction, but a matter of eternal consequence, a gift that costs God the life of his only Son. Is Archbishop right? Absolutely. For the last 50 years, our Catholic people, and especially our young people, have been exposed to weak, if not errant, teaching. And guess what? It's finally caught up with us. Most Catholics are clueless about the Catholic faith. Only a small number of Catholics come to church with any regularity. And as I've shared with you many times before, one of the most basic things that sets Catholicism apart from all other religions, our belief in the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the Gallup people say at best only 30% of Catholics in America believe it. That means the majority of Catholics do not. So it's no wonder when you bring up the whole idea of the end of time as one of our doctrines, people scratch their heads and say, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I had no idea. Because we weren't taught it. So what can we do? Well, as David Walsh reminds us all, today is the beginning of the church calendar year. And as with our secular celebration of New Year, on December 31st, we make all kinds of resolutions, right? And the wonderful thing about being a Catholic, as you all will learn, is that we Catholics make all these resolutions on December 31st, and then we go out and party all night long, and then we forget about them on the 1st. But alas, we've got Ash Wednesday just a couple of months away, so we can start all over again. We kind of get a second chance at it, all joking aside. But really and truly, today is a day when we should be making an important resolution. And what is that resolution? To get the Catholic Church in the United States back on the right track. To infuse spirituality back into the church. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, maybe the better question is to ask, what's a spiritual person to begin with? What are the characteristics or the qualities of a spiritual person? First of all, a spiritual person has a sense of transcendence. When they look at this material world, they don't get hung up in it or have the illusion that that's all there is. They look at this world, this material world, and they see it as a gift from God, but also as a reminder that there's a greater power who made it all. Something happened this week. It just happened very unexpectedly, but it was a reminder of this. One of our daily Mass attenders came running out on the parking lot after morning Mass. And he pulled out this picture. And as soon as I looked at the picture, I could see it was a picture of an ultrasound. It was a picture of his daughter-in-law's most recent ultrasound. She's 13 weeks pregnant. And he looked at this picture, and all of a sudden, he started to cry. And this is not a man who cries. He got tears in his eyes. And he said, how can anybody not believe that this is a human being? How could anybody not believe that this is a gift from God? And I said, Ted, unfortunately, 4,000 of them a day in America do not have that belief. You see, people will look at that ultrasound and say, oh, it's a POC, a product of conception. That's what the abortionists like to call a baby in the womb. It's a product of conception. Or it's a mass of fetal tissue. Fetal tissue. Isn't that a great thing to call your unborn baby? Hi, fetal tissue. I love the way you feel in my tummy. No. It's a baby. It's a child of God. When's the last time you looked at a beautiful sunset? And we've had so many of those this past fall. And you look at that sunset or that sunrise early in the morning as the sun's coming up from the east. And you may be sipping on your coffee at the time, and maybe you just got your peepers opened up. But you looked at that, and all of a sudden you felt chills going up and down your spine. All of a sudden you realized that there's something huge in play here. And it's not meteorology, it's theology, it's God. So you see, a person who's a spiritual person has a sense of transcendence, that there is a greater power, that there is a God. Secondly, a spiritual person has a sense of vocation. What do I mean by that? That you're put on planet Earth with a purpose. It's not by chance that you're here. Your life has meaning because God put you here for a reason. And maybe sometimes it may not be until the end of life before we finally get the big picture of what that purpose is. But I can assure you, God doesn't do things by chance. He puts you here for a purpose. You have a mission in this life. A number of years ago, back in the 90s, I was asked by the Ohio County Medical Society to do some research and to present a paper and a talk on the role of religion and medicine. And I spent a month doing research. And when I got done, my whole thinking was changed with regard to every time I look at a doctor, I look at a nurse, I look at a radiology tech, or whomever the person is. And here's what I discovered. If you are in medicine, if you practice medicine at any level, you have a ministry and never a job. Why? Because what other vocation other than the priesthood itself would link you up so closely with what Jesus Christ himself did day after day after day? Everywhere he went, he was touching people, healing people, people possessed by demons, people who were frothing at the mouth. Whatever the case may be, Jesus never let a sick person pass him by. He always stopped. And how many times have we heard when he was on the road, busy, heading to Jerusalem, he took the time when other people would say, oh, he's too busy, he's too busy. Jesus would stop and help. That's why those of you who are in medicine, if you ever consider what you're doing as humdrum or just a job, then you're selling your work short, because you have united your labor with the work of God's kingdom. And that's important to keep in mind. Who would have ever thunk that a police officer could see his work as somehow a vocation in God's kingdom? You may have heard this story. It went viral on the internet about a New York City Police Department officer. Jennifer Foster of Florence, Arizona, was visiting Times Square with her husband on November 14th when she spotted a shoeless man asking for change. Foster is the manager of the Pinal County Sheriff's Public Safety Communications Center. Right when I was about to approach, one of your officers, she writes to the New York PD, says, came up behind this homeless man. The officer said, I have these size 12 boots for you. They are all weather. Let's put them on and take care of you. The officer squatted down on the ground and proceeded to put socks and new boots on this homeless man. Foster said that the officer did not know she was watching, nor did he know that she took a photo of him. I have been in law enforcement for 17 years. I was never so impressed in my life. I did not get the officer's name, Foster wrote. It is important, I think, for all of us to remember the real reason we are in this line of work. The officer's name was revealed to be Officer Lawrence DePrimo, 25 years old, of Long Island. He joined the New York Police Department in 2010, and he currently lives with his parents. It was freezing out, and you could see the blisters on the man's feet, Officer DePrimo told the paper, the New York Times. I had 2 pairs of socks, and I was cold. DePrimo found out that the man, whose name he does not know, wore a size 12. He went into a Skechers shoe store and bought the all-weather boots for $75. DePrimo said the man was thrilled with the boots and went on his way. DePrimo, in an interview with the New York Times, said that he kept the receipt in his vest pocket to, quote, remind me that sometimes people have it worse than I do. Amazing. He stopped to help this homeless man. You know, a number of years ago, I served as chaplain for the West Virginia State Police, and most of my work with state troopers was done in private sessions. But you know what? It would shock you at the number of troopers who were so involved doing things that most people would not consider law enforcement, just putting bad people in jail. So many times they would take food baskets to the poor and do other things, make hospital visits, for goodness sake. My bottom line is this: we all have a vocation in life. What's your vocation? Do you see your work as vocation? You should if you're a spiritual person. Thirdly, a spiritual person uses spiritual resources to figure out their problems in this life. We don't rush to the horoscopes. We don't go to the bookstore to the self-help section and scan that for hours. We don't Google Ann Landers or Dr. Phil or anyone else for the answers to life's problems. We come to realize that, first of all, prayer is our number one source of answer for our issues. And then beyond that, our Mass, looking at the lives of the saints, spiritual reading, and yes, even talking with spiritual people. Fourth, spiritual people do good things habitually. It's not an extra added attraction. It's not something that just happens every now and then when they think of it. They do it naturally and habitually. It's a part of their lives. The truly spiritual person is quick to forgive, even when they have been injured severely by others. The spiritual person is quick to show gratitude for the most simple of gifts they receive. But they're always conscious about the needs of others and always willing to help the needs of others. I'd like to close with another story. This one is one that you may not know, but you certainly know the characters involved. Darrell Hill was the first African American to play football for the University of Maryland in the early 1960s. No surprise, he received a lot of abuse from people in the South, particularly from the team ironically called the Deacons from Wake Forest, North Carolina. No offense to any Wake Forest fans in here. With the pregame warm-up ended and the nastiness in high gear, Hill noticed a Wake Forest captain approaching him. He stopped in front of Hill and said, "Look, I want to apologize for the behavior of my fans." Then he did an astonishing thing. He draped his arm over Hill's shoulder and began to walk openly with him toward the Wake Forest side of the field, where the jeering was at its worst. By the time the two of them reached the middle of the field, the rude screaming had dropped to a near silence. Now, that took a lot of courage for that football captain. Who was he? His name was Brian Piccolo, who would be one of the inspirations for TV's Brian's Song, which dramatized the relationship between Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo in his losing battle with cancer. No hesitation in Piccolo's part. He just did it. Why? because he was a spiritual person. God had touched his heart in such a way that he didn't see black or white, old or young. He didn't see any difference. The fact that we are all humans, rich, poor, tall, short, whatever the case may be. He saw a need and he put himself at risk, but he did it. So you may be asking, okay, this spiritual life, okay, I'm willing to take the pledge, make a resolution, I'm going to become a spiritual person this year. Where do I begin? It begins in the silence of your hearts at this Mass. Are you happy with the way you feel about yourself, your life at this point in time in your life? Do you feel complete or satisfied at this moment? Do you feel a lack of peace deep inside? Maybe you can put your finger on it, maybe you can't put your finger on it. Do you have difficult times sleeping? How often do you smile naturally? You know, if those are issues that you struggle with in this life, then that's the indication from God, the divine nudge, if you will, that it's time to make your resolution. What do you do next? You start praying about it at this Mass. You resolve that by the time you leave the door today, you're going to do your best with God's help in the coming year to become a spiritual person. Thirdly, you look for resources to help you. Where do you get them? EWTN. Turn that station on and look at their footnotes. That's a great place to start. Google EWTN. But look under Catholic titles. The internet is a great resource. There are all kinds of books out there and things that are available. You might want to look into a Bible study. Come to RCIA class, or whatever the case may be. The most important thing is to come to Mass with regularity. Maybe you could squeeze 20 minutes in the morning to just come to daily Mass once a week in addition to your regular Sunday attendance. And then finally, and as Nike said it best a number of years ago, just do it. Put your foot down and do it. What do you have to lose? Misery, unhappiness, personal pain? If that's what you're going to lose, then do it. Really do it. Because my brothers and sisters, once you become a truly spiritual person, the end of time is no big deal. The way Jesus speaks of it as the time of joyful anticipation then becomes the way that you see it and you live it.